We're built to walk uphill. And when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's the uphill climb that it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. Almost all the positive emotion we feel, the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, and that's to be filled with the Spirit of God, by the way, because that's what enthusiasm means. That's experienced in relationship to a goal. And so in some sense, and this is part of the religious enterprise, you want a goal that you can never attain, right? So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. And that's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are in some sense transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And the problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, well, first of all, that's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. That's not. You want a horizon of ever-expanding possibility. And so it does happen to people because they've staked their soul on the attainment of an instrumental goal. And it can be a pretty high-order goal. It was in your case. But then you think, well, now I'm there. Now what? Well, the answer can't be, well, I'm going to live in the lap of luxury and never have to leave the What do you want to be, a giant infant with a gold bottle? You never have to do anything but lay on your back and suck? It's like, well, you see the problem with that as a conceptualization. It's no, you want to be like an active warrior moving uphill with your sword in hand. And that's dynamic, that's exciting. And that's why so many young men disappear into video games. That's all acted out in the video game. So they have to act that out in their own life. Not that I despise video games, because I don't, but they're not a substitute for life. They might be good training under some conditions for life. I think it's very difficult for us to understand our embodied environments well enough to duplicate them in a healthy and comprehensive manner in the virtual world, because we just don't understand what it is that we're doing when we actually do things rather than represent them. So, for example, I've thought a lot about online university. Okay, so then you can imagine, well, you can certainly imagine online lecture courses. And you could say, well, the fact that they can be delivered on a large scale very inexpensively is a virtue. You can bring the knowledge to a very large number of people at a low cost, so why not do that? And so that's half the university. And then you could say, well, imagine that you generated the system of universal tests, which is a possibility, and that means you could bring accreditation to everyone at a low cost as well. And that's that. The university's online. But that presumes that you know what the university is, and you don't. Because, well, here's some other things the university is. An excuse for a credible excuse that's socially sanctioned for young people who have not yet established a career goal to adopt an identity of upward striving for 4 years away from their parents while they meet a new group of friends. Like, that might be 90% of the university for all we know, because it's certainly, for me, for example, when I went to college, I left home when I was 17, and I left this small town I had grown up in, and in many ways, I left the peers that I had been associating with. Now, a couple of them came to college with me, so I had a toehold there. But I made an entirely different group of friends, and they were friends whose goals were quite radically different from the friends that I, let's say, in some sense, left behind. Well, the reformulation of my peer network might have been the most important part of the first part of my education. Now, I was fortunate at this place. It was called Grand Prairie College. I had 7 professors, 7, which is really good, who really loved to teach. And so I also learned a lot in the formal sense. But while I was doing that, I was also negotiating, well, how much partying do you actually do? because 0 isn't the right amount. But every goddamn night till 3 a.m. isn't the right amount either, because you have to balance that in some sense with practicality and upward striving. And so, and how do I live with other people, my roommates? So I had one roommate who's a really good friend of mine still, and he walked 1,000 miles with me this year when I was ill, literally. So I really liked living with him because he was a tough guy, worked in lead smelters, and he was a cowboy, and he was a tough guy, 4 years older than me, about 3 years older than me. He'd come back to school after bouncing around through these like tough working class occupations, and he had his feet on the ground in lots of ways. And I really liked him as a roommate because I'd buy some groceries and then he'd buy some groceries, or I'd make dinner and he'd make breakfast, and none of that was ever explicitly negotiated. He was just very aware of this reciprocal altruism, technically. He was very good at, we were both good at tracking our mutual obligations and fulfilling them. So we had a very peaceful relationship. I lived with him for a year and then a little bit at different times and in different places. And I learned to live with a whole variety of roommates. I had many roommates. We had a kind of a frat house in the first college I went to, and I think anywhere from 6 to 20 people lived there depending on the week, you know. It was ridiculous. It was way too much fun. And that was also a problem. But when I look back on that time in my life, I certainly can't reduce the educational experience to virtual classes and virtual tests. That's 10% of it. And we don't know how to replicate those environments that are so formative, especially in their everydayness, you know, because you live with your roommates. That's a 24-hour thing. And so the problem with virtualization is that we don't understand our environments well enough to be certain that we're not excluding something vital when we concentrate only on what we think conceptually is important. Now, I meet with my son pretty regularly for a project we're working on, which is an app that will teach people to write while they write and use it. So we're quite excited about this. But I meet with him virtually once a week. And it's actually very efficient. He's on the screen. We can see our project in front of us. We can do mutual editing of some of the underlying material, educational material. There's a real place for it. And I have a cottage up north in Toronto where we've set up a studio like your studio here, although ours isn't quite as impressive. But I can have an interview and discussion with anyone, anywhere in the world, even in a foreign language. And that's like unbelievably remarkable. But that doesn't mean that we know how to virtualize reality or that we should flee into it, right? And these new technologies, they're unbelievably radical and they're very hard to master. And so we all have to be careful and try to keep our feet on the ground to some degree when we're using them. So for example, now, I've really only figured this out in the last 3 months. I get up and I do a series of exercises that my wife taught me that are based in the Kundalini yoga tradition. That's real helpful. Flexibility and breathing exercises. That reduces my anxiety during the day, I would say about 25%. And then I try to reserve some time either for writing or I'm working on a number of artistic projects. And so I'm going to do one or those for a couple hours in the morning, and then maybe a walk or something with my wife and breakfast. I have breakfast during all this. And then I can turn to the sort of connected world, email and the podcasts and so forth. And so there's this balance between privacy, introverted privacy, let's say, and disconnect from everyone except for my wife, and then contemplated reconnection with the virtual world. That seems to be working out pretty well. You want to get a balance of that that's actually, to use a terrible cliche, sustainable, right? So you want to hit your projects hard, but you have to leave in that not with entertainment, but with culture, because those are not the same thing. Entertainment is an approximation to culture. You need to leave in that with culture, that's beauty and drama and art and all of that, and then with intimate relationships and friendships. And well, it's very difficult to get the balance of all that correct. And it's very difficult to do that virtually. So, but I certainly wouldn't forego the technology, and neither would the rest of us. It's like people complain about their phones, but they carry them with them everywhere they go. And I'm not cynical about that. The phone, it's not a phone. God only knows what it is. But it's definitely not a phone. And so it's not surprising that since it just appeared and it's so insanely powerful that we don't know what to do with it, and that might even wreck everything. Like God only knows. Twitter itself could bring civilization to a halt. We don't know how to manage the unintended consequences of our technological prowess.